Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. This podcast is brought to you by Virtual Not Distant, where we help managers and teams transition to an office-optional approach. Find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com and check out our show notes and pictures of our lovely guests over on the podcast page. It's great to have you here, listeners. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to episode 245 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, which is a What's Going On episode. In fact, it's a what we can all learn from what's going on, because there is a lot going on. So this is an episode where we cover some of the news we've picked up over the last month, mainly about remote work and things that we can learn from and that we can explore. And when I say we, what I mean is myself and my colleague Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya. How are you?
I'm all right, Pilar. Hello, and hello, everybody. I'm okay, but it's hot here in Spain at the moment.
And you are really, I have to say, listeners, it is quite a sacrifice because Maya turned her aircon off, and I can even feel it from here, from the other side of Skype, the heat.
Yes, the windows are closed, the aircon is off. So, I'll see how long I last. If I'm fading away at the end, you'll just have to keep talking more.
So listeners, if Maya gets really, really quiet near the end, don't worry, it's just the heat, so she'll be fine once the aircon is on. Good. So as I say, we have quite a handful, quite a few articles. And then, of course, we've also got some stuff to discuss around Virtual Not Distant, what we're doing, what the people we're connected to in the space are doing, and some feedback from listeners. But let's start with this bunch of articles we have. So Maya, something I saw which is more around, well, it's definitely connected to remote work, but the angle is more on the future of work and some of the stuff that's happening and the way in which how people operate are changing. And it's an article in wired.co.uk with the headline, "There's a massive scam hiding behind Google's search results." And I'll read the tagline because it's a great summary. People around the world are populating search engine results for a few dollars an hour, but some have found a way to make a tidy profit. And this is from the 2nd of July, 2020. And it's basically, I suppose, about the people behind tech that we don't think about, the little jobs that get delegated, micro work, stuff that we don't even think about, of all the people that are involved in some of the work around search engines, in the website, search engine optimization, etc. Anything that you took from the article or any of the bits that you would like to highlight for listeners?
I thought it was really interesting, actually. I really enjoyed reading this one. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was, for all the fear about AI taking over our jobs, I think this proves that human ingenuity is going to win, at least for the time being. If peace workers in Africa and India are managing to fool Google into paying them for results obtained by a European by using probably something as simple as a VPN, then good for them. And I don't think a robot's going to take away that initiative anytime soon.
Yeah, so what's happening is, and I'm going to quote, many of the projects require local knowledge, meaning workers must certify that they're residents of a specific country and fluent in the language, and that people in lower income countries can't outcompete other freelancers on price. So residents of the Middle East or South Asia might receive just a few dollars per hour, while those in the UK, Europe, and the US can make 4 times as much. So instead, some freelancers have decided to game the system. Remote workers in poorer countries are evading residency requirements to present themselves to machines as European residents. These independent contractors are crossing borders using their laptops, making the boundaries imposed by the company redundant. I think your point about human ingenuity is really it is really interesting, and there's so much stuff in here, like the thing about the salaries being adjusted to what is to the different countries, so that as we know, so that people can't outcompete just on price. I mean, that could be up for debate whether that's ethical or not.
Well, we talked about
I can
this.
see both sides.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this when we looked at Facebook. I think it was last month. We talked about their hiring policy and thinking about introducing salary bands depending on where you're located and the intrinsic unfairness of that. But I think it's just highlighting this whole issue of when you have a really global workforce or a global hiring environment or a global platform like these microtasking platforms, it shows how hard it is to level the playing field in any meaningful way, because costs of living and access to hard currency are just so variable, so diverse. And these platforms, it mentions that they do pay more for European nationals or people who are physically resident in the EU, but I bet they're actually a very poor hourly wage for anybody who has to support European living costs, because these things tend to be poorly paid by definition. So if some kid in Africa manages to earn the European rate, there's going to be a very strong motivation for them to try and do that if they can, and to game the algorithm. What that does to the search results, I don't know, but it'd be interesting to see. The article also mentions a book about the role of humans in AI, which I've added that to my Audible reading queue because I thought that just looks so interesting. I know there have been a number of cases where there are startups that are building an AI to do things, but they're having to actually get humans to do it first to train the AI. And you get that whole sort of garbage in, garbage out, or you get the inherent human biases that go with that. So there are an awful lot of consequences. And it really does prove that sometimes there's a little bit too much of the promise of technology where it's not quite there yet. It'd be easier if we could all just be honest, actually, and say that these search results are populated by humans paid however many cents an hour or whatever.
Yeah, that's also such a great point about the AI still needed so much human input, because I think sometimes we do forget that that's the starting point with the plus and minuses that brings to it, that brings to the system. So very interesting. So there we go, listeners. Maya will stick the link to the show in the show notes to the article. But if you want to just have a quick look, it's called "There's a Massive Scam Hiding Behind Google's Search Results."
Yes, and I think one more point on that is because of the economic crisis that Europe and the rest of the world is looking down at the moment, then there might be a lot more people in less traditional markets, i.e. in the developed world with higher living costs, who are going to be very interested in doing this kind of micro-task work online. So be interesting to see how that affects the uptake of these kind of jobs.
Yeah, interesting times. Good. So let's start to move on. There's a collection of articles around the adoption of remote work. Well, when I say a collection, I mean two. And as we start to as the pandemic progresses, as we start to change the restrictions that we've had for the past months, etc., different companies are saying, "Hey, we're introducing this. We're sustaining remote. We're calling it this other thing," and it's so fascinating. And I wanted to highlight Fujitsu's recent press release. So when I say recent, we are recording on the 21st of July, 2020, and I saw it and I thought, wow, I really like how they're doing this and how they are communicating this. So the article, it's actually, as I said, a press release on the Fujitsu website. What I can't see is exactly the date. 6th of July, 2020, published through their Tokyo. It says Tokyo. So basically they're not just adopting remote, they're calling it work-life shift. So their press release is titled "Fujitsu Embarks Towards New Normal, Redefining Work Styles for its Japan Office." I've got some notes, and I love this work-life shift thing. What struck you? What did you see that you liked there, Maya?
Well, I focused on the phrasing as well, because I think the word shift is excellent because it really does embrace the change management aspect of this. It's not a case of, we're simply teleport from A to B. There's a process here that they're acknowledging and saying people have got to actually make a change in the way that they're working, and particularly the Japanese work style culture of incredibly long hours and intense supervision and management and hierarchies and so on. This is such a departure. I know that there's a Japanese word for death by overwork or something. I can't remember what it is, but it's one of the few languages that actually has a word for that, because it's that much of a phenomenon. And to have this shift then to work that's really so much more flexible and letting people make decisions according to their lifestyle and the content of the work itself, as well as their business roles and responsibility, just feels like a massive departure. And they're actually resourcing it properly. They're acknowledging that it's going to take changes in the tech infrastructure and in initiating that cultural change. So I thought it was incredibly encouraging.
Yeah. And listeners, if any of you are working in Japan or for a Japanese company, or anyone has any insight into the work culture there and how this working from anywhere concept has evolved there, we'd love to hear from you, because of course that's not something that I have a lot of insight into. So virtualnotdistant.com, we have a contact form there for you if you have any insight. The only thing I remember was a few years ago when there was an article by I don't know if it was the European Fund or the Future. Yeah, I think it was the European Fund, looking at how mobile-enabled work was being introduced in different countries. And they said that Japan was really looking at increasing it because they needed more mobility in their work population. They just were finding that some people were staying at home a lot more,
right.
and the aging population. There was a whole load of thing. I'm not explaining it very well, but so that's the only time. But this was a few years ago. Yes, so just building on what you were saying, Maya, the initial lines of this article, they say work-life shift is not only a concept of work, but represents a comprehensive initiative to realize employee well-being by shifting pre-existing notions of life and work through digital innovation. And then, which I really like, that it really thinks about the different aspects of this shift, as you mentioned. And it says, Fujitsu's work-life shift initiative relies on 3 core principles to achieve this vision: smart working, borderless office, and culture change. And this is something that I'm coming across quite often now with companies who say, okay, we need to change the tech, so smart working. We need to change the workplace, borderless office, and we need to change the culture change. So I like that they've really identified those 3 things as 3 things that need to happen.
Yes, and need to happen sort of interdependently. It's all part of adding up to that whole process of making the transition. You can't tackle them one after the other or separately. That's not going to work. You have to take people with you on all 3 of them, or it will fall over. It was really interesting. This and the next article we're going to look at were kind of good reminders for me that the scale at which this is having to happen at such speed. A lot of the client work that we've done has tended to be at the team level, and that might be sort of piloting just one team trying to transition to remote within a much larger organization. But now this is happening right across the board, and it's happening from the very top. And it's just kind of fairly unbelievable to bear witness to the pace of change going on right now.
Mm-hmm. And I think, as you're saying, also the team practices can then be adopted at an organizational level. So there's a lot of remote collaboration practices that teams adopt that need to be adopted also at an organizational level in order for the whole thing to work and in order for the companies to really accommodate for everyone. That goes from things around planned spontaneity to shared learning to documentation, etc., that there's a lot of change that needs to come from the top and role modeled from the top and enabled from the top. So I was thinking, it's really making me understand the the importance of naming differently this transition. So for some people, especially with some of the Spanish people I'm talking to, I'm saying, find a different word, teletrabajo. So the same like remote work, or it's nice to call it something different. And we've called it, Fujitsu's called it work-life shift. How nice, because it also gives you some identity and it shows some thought. So shall we move on to what you were saying? So the other article, which is, again, published by the people who are doing the transformation, who are Essex County Council. I imagine that's the article you were referring to, Maya?
Yes, and there was the one about Siemens in India as well.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Which I only took a very quick look at. But again, another massive tech firm introducing change right across the board in a very short time frame. And doing so on the face of it very positively.
Yes. So that was an article by Robert Kropp, who talked about the change that Siemens is going through. So they're also like Fujitsu saying, okay, this is here to stay. What I found interesting about that is that it wasn't as holistic as the Fujitsu. And actually, Robert mentioned this in his article. It was something that we've seen. This is this kind of what we would hope and expect for. Of course, he did say that the main thing why he was highlighting that is because Siemens is in Germany, the headquarters are in Germany, and that country has traditionally not adopted remote work much. So that's why he thought, okay, yeah, it might be nothing revolutionary, but hey, look at the context.
Yes.
Context is so important.
And the cultural shifts that are going on, just, as people get the chance to work remotely, there's going to be much more blending, I think, and there'll probably be some more convergence of working cultures around the world, because we won't be just limited in working for people in the city that we live in. So it'll be just really interesting to see how all of that maybe smooths out a bit over time.
Yeah, and it'd been interesting to see in international companies whether, this is another danger that we get even more separation between locations, whether some really adopt this work from everywhere and some decide not to. But hey, with as long as we've tried, no?
Yeah, there's so much experimentation going on in real time right now.
And then that article, what I found really interesting from Robert's article is that Bagashiri Pancholi, I've never said her name out loud, I've only read it, made a whole lot of comments about how some of this is panning out in India. So talking about different countries and different cultures, it's just interesting again that she added that other part of the world that I know very little, if not nothing, about how it's really working out there. So, so definitely, thanks for bringing that back into the conversation, Maya. It's definitely worth a good look. Definitely.
And it's interesting to think of big tech companies in both Japan and India, because of what's going on with China and the US and UK at the moment, that there could end up being a lot more shift to other suppliers of technology in the future for us here in the West. And I think it's probably a good idea for us all to keep an eye on what's going on in places like India as potential suppliers of the technology that we're using to collaborate from here in the not too distant future.
Yeah, good point. So now another organization that's made a shift, and I really like how they've gone about this. I was very pleased. So this is the Essex Council. I think it is the service transformation part of that council. And thank you to Christine McDonald from Hub Events for pinging me on LinkedIn to say, hey, Pilar, look at this. And to Maria Ferres, who's the person who posted about this. And so let me just read so it's on the essex.gov.uk blog, in the service transformation blog, because they have a few blogs, 17th of July, 2020. And basically they've gone, okay, we've done our forced remote work. Let's see what the evidence tells us here to see what works, how we want to move forwards. And I love it. I just love that they went, okay, what we found. They've got great headlines, which I'm sure we can highlight all of them because they're all important. What did you think, Maya?
I thought there was, definitely lots to admire about this, not least the fact that, public sector organisations like local government do come in for a lot of criticism for being slow or unresponsive. And I just love the fact that they've thought, okay, we've been through this. We're going to actually do some primary research and ask people what they thought about it instead of just reacting to it. So that was the first point that I thought was excellent. A lot of what they found wasn't earth-shatteringly surprising in lots of respect. Working remotely works best when it's by choice. I don't think any of us would have argued with that. They found that people often thought it worked best when they weren't doing it every day. And again, I think that shows that obviously they're researching remote work at a not typical time for doing it, but it's an important finding, and it does reflect the fact we might have quite a hybrid future to look forward to. I quite like the fact that they dug into some of the important details, like trying to unpick remote work versus flexible work, people's different needs and motivations around the two, because they're so often conflated, particularly at the moment. They dug into gender aspects, which we're not seeing a lot from commercial organisations and research. Well, we're seeing it in Spain, but it's not coming out of sort of UK and US research, the way that remote working might affect particularly mothers differently to fathers. So I thought there was lots here that was really interesting. The final thing that, again, pretty obvious finding, but they made it very explicit. They found that managers who are resistant to remote working tend to be the ones who are trying to measure time over tasks, but the managers who are not resistant to remote working are the ones who trust their team, and they actually get more productivity out of their teams. The ones who trust them get out of the way and let them do the work instead of trying to monitor it on every task level.
Yeah, I think it's so great, like you said, that they're saying they've really seen these things and they're communicating and they're going, this is not just theory, this is what we've seen. And I'm also really glad that they really spelled out that working remotely works best when it's by choice.
Yeah.
Because I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about how worried they were that some people's experience of remote work will have been very bad. And of course, we know that this context is not the one that anyone was advocating for. But I think we need to remember that so that when it hasn't worked, we give it a second chance if we want to at some point.
Yes.
So I'm not saying it has to work for everyone, but if this has been a bad experience, let's not rule it out forever, but let's just say, okay, it didn't work in this way or whatever. So I think that's a really good reminder just to see it like that.
Yes.
It's really important.
Yeah, it was a nice article. I think we'll definitely share this one on its own, because it stands up so many important findings, which a lot of it is obvious, but they've made it explicit by just calling it out and asking people what they think. So yeah, I really like that one.
Yeah. So they found also, like you say, that managers lead by example to either help or hinder remote working. The right technology can reduce stress and frustration amongst employees. And they said that I've heard this a lot, that they had the Microsoft ecosystem, but then they supplemented it with Miro and Mural. I mean, these are the names we're hearing a lot of. The companies that adopt remote working see an increase in efficiencies in business process. Like you said, women spend more time on childcare responsibilities at home. There was something I was talking to with a potential client in Spain who was saying that they were concerned because when they had offered further working from home to their people, most of the people that were taking it up were women. And they understood that also what was happening was that women were taking it up because they were expected also to do the work at home, the homework, the home working, look after the home, and that they were a little bit afraid about the gender inequality. And all I could say is stop talking about telework, think about remote work, and mention co-working spaces. even as an option, definitely. Even if not.
Yeah. And talk about flexibility and sharing and, really balancing the roles, because people's professional roles and personal ones can work. And it shouldn't be about that flexibility and remote options only being available when people have an excuse for it. If that's the one thing we can hopefully leave behind after this period.
Yeah. And then they have at the end of the article something I really like, which could even be like a little checklist, if anyone wants to borrow it, on assessing our work. So talking about measuring results and not time, etc. They've really got, okay, what are the things that we need to measure? And I love that. I love all of that. That list, I think, could be very useful for some people.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then finally, just one thing, you know how before the pandemic we were like, oh, hybrid teams are the most difficult teams. Oh, the hybrid approach is the worst. But that's where we're moving to. That's where we're moving to, because this is what we've got. We've now got places where everyone used to go into the office, and now some people don't want to go back, and employees might be quite happy also with that. So interesting times.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have to get a lot more granular and specific about what we mean by a hybrid team. And, if we can separate out from where people do the work from how they do it with the remote first mindset, but that might mean coming in and sharing equipment or a physical meeting space or other resources and so on, or some people doing that more often and others never, or whatever. So we're going to need new vocabulary.
That's interesting. So listeners, virtualnotdistant.com, send us some of the ways, similar to how we were talking about work-life shift. Earlier on in the year, we had work wherever. Jackie Wimple was saying work wherever, which I loved. We have a lot of people are coming up with this. So anyway, congratulations, much congratulations to Maria Ferres and team for publishing that. As Maya, as you were saying, we have so many examples of distributed companies, but they're always of a certain sector. They're mainly American. It's really nice to have local government in the UK saying, hey, this is how we did it. Because unless we hear all of this, we're not going to move on.
Yes, it's obviously that Facebook and Apple are going to make the headlines, but this is the jobs that people are doing in everyday neighbourhoods near you. It's great to be able to compare them, and the evidence is starting to come in now.
Excellent. So congratulations, Essex County Council. And now let's go to another article. So this was in The Guardian. And again, I picked this up from my feed shared by Claudia Dernier. By the way, listeners, we're going to make a little bit more active our LinkedIn page, which was wonderfully active for a while. And we'd love you to come over there and tell us what you think, share any thoughts on the articles as well that we share over there, on the podcast episodes that we share over there. Because it seems, I found this, Maya, did you find it as well that LinkedIn has picked up since the pandemic?
I think a lot of social interaction has, because, obviously LinkedIn is stepping into that gap of, we haven't got the physical networking events. So LinkedIn's there for us, hopefully.
Yes. So this is an article in The Guardian. I'm just pulling it up. If I can see it. Here we go.
Yeah, I don't want to read this article again. I found it really depressing.
Don't worry. Okay, so it's from the 14th of July, 2020, and it's called End of the Office, the Quiet, Grinding Loneliness of Working from Home. It's okay. I think it's a sobering reminder. So don't worry, Maya. It's okay.
I was reading this on The Guardian app the day it came out, and a couple people then sent me the link to it because they know what I do and what I write about. And sent me the link in a kind of, so what do you say to this? Kind of a way, ellipsis question mark. I was just, okay. So now we've got to defend the experience of working from home against the experience of living through sort of the greatest global health crisis of anyone's lifetime.
That is a very important point.
It's not surprising that people are depressed and sad and anxious.
Yeah. And we can also say we welcome it because we need both sides of the debate to help you make an informed decision. So that's, but I completely take your point that let's compare like with like. However, I thought it was also quite an interesting contrast to an article we shared last month about parents not wanting to go back to the office.
Absolutely. So, there are two sides to this. And it did highlight for me that a lot of people are having to do this work in incredibly unsuitable situations, in terms of their accommodation, their tech, the way that their work normally works. It really does. It's very easy to say a lot of knowledge work is simply transferable, but some of it simply isn't.
Yeah, yeah. And so, quoting from the article, according to a survey by the global financial services company Jefferies, 61% of more than 1,500 UK respondents said they would return to work immediately if they could. I have to say that I know that it's not only knowledge workers that have been away from work, but I wish they said return to the workplace or to the original workplace instead of return to work. Some people have been working their socks off at home. But anyway, that's by the by. And then there's an example of this. So the article has a couple of personal stories. So they're really interesting, like you say, because they really show us the context and how people have been working. So I'll quote, last month's Atkins boss, Anna Dunn, floated with her team the idea of ditching the office for good and saving £200,000 a year in rent. I said that the money would be distributed to them in a bonus to some degree, Dunn says from her kitchen. She too misses the office. And then she says, I thought there might be this desire to stay remote, but not one person does. They all want to go back. So I think, office optional is what we say to that. I think it's really important to be giving these people a voice also.
Yes, fair play to them for asking, because I'm sure that's not happening in a lot of workplaces. People are going to make a decision at the board level with probably relatively little consultation, let's face it. These things are going to be made on a pragmatic and financial decision-making criteria, I would imagine. So, but it was just frustrating. I mean, I was one of the first people that they quoted, this lady who was having panic attacks and losing weight and is clearly clinically depressed. And she said, at first I thought it was because the job was demanding, but I realised it was more the isolation and not being able to interact with people. Well, then you can change that aspect of it. You know, we're all restricted on interacting with people whilst going through a legal lockdown, but the work, you can build in so much more, as we talk about with visible teamwork, with planned spontaneity and deliberate communication. It's not working from home that's the problem, it's the lack of interaction. And you can redesign the work to include all of that if you're aware of it. So it's sort of the confusion of cause and effect here that I found frustrating, and that's costing people in terms of their mental health, which is, really, really sad.
Yeah, it's such a mindset shift that there are more ways of connecting than the ones we're used to, and that there are more ways of reaching out, and that there are more ways of having interactions. Of course, we have to remember, as we were saying earlier, that it's not just our work interactions that have disappeared. Also our social ones. Yeah. And that's really strange. I mean, really rare, because that's not what happens in remote work as we love it. Usually you do have other interactions.
And you value them more, and you're probably more deliberate about them. And, you go and have a drink with people because you like them rather than because you share an office with them and things like that. And yes. we had all of that taken away as well. So, I'm sure that's a hugely contributing factor to what's going on with a lot of the people that they've quoted in this article. There was also the section of the article about monitoring software, again coming back to these issues of trust and what are people doing, again highlighting the fact that a lot of the people tasked with managing others working remotely here had zero preparation for that, and clearly an awful lot of their own insecurities. They're responsible for the work of other people, but suddenly they've got no idea what they're doing and how they're doing it, never mind how they are. So they're seeing this big uptick in the use of monitoring software. And they mentioned an app which I'd never come across before called TerraMind, who was saying that they were developed for clients who were concerned about security as much as productivity. But what they'd found during the pandemic was that ratio had flipped, and now far more people were using them to monitor what people were actually doing, rather than because they're concerned about security, they're concerned about the actual productivity and stuff happening. So it really has changed, the way that managers are starting to manifest their role and try and make what their employees are doing apparent to them. Again, visible teamwork, make the work visible. You don't have to monitor the tasks like this but it's so hard. People have had to put this in place overnight, and well, there's an app that will show me what people are doing. Right, quick, plug that in, and then we can see if anybody's doing any work. To actually implement visible teamwork properly means stepping back from it and looking at the work as a whole. And whilst we can help you with all of that, it does take time, and it does take a a little bit more attention and intentionality than most people had any possibility of doing over the last few months.
And it's important to take note of that and go, okay, that helped us then. Now, if we want to make this sustainable, if we do want our people to be happy, etc., how are we going to do it moving forwards? Because I think that was a good, quick solution.
Yeah.
Let's see about how to move forwards. Having said all of that about the loneliness, we do know that this is a concern when in remote workers, in company that have lots, in distributed companies. And that's why we launched at the beginning of this year. We prepared it last year with Shield Geo, a whole season of 7 episodes around connection and disconnection in remote teams. So listeners, if you are relatively new or if you haven't listened to that yet, then episode 221 is the first one. And then from then on, every other episode looks at this theme, this topic, in episodes of half an hour with Brie Kajati as the host and lots of guests. It's really worth a listen because it goes into depth of in that subject matter, which will continue to be an issue. And disconnection and that feeling of loneliness can come at any moment. And I wouldn't be surprised if in some organizations that go hybrid, as in some people return to the office and some people stay working from wherever, I wouldn't be surprised if we see loneliness also creeping in people in the office, because that's going to be a different context. Expectations are going to change. So let's look out for that.
Totally. There are going to be a lot of people who are thinking, I can't wait to get back to work. And what they mean is, I can't wait to get back to normal. And they're talking about the normal, up until the end of February or whenever it was. And, that's what people are desperately missing is that normal life when we didn't have this huge other factor to take into account in everything we do. So going back to work isn't going to deliver a time machine. And I'm sure you're right, there will be implications as that sinks into people's reality longer term, especially once we move past the disaster response into, I know you hate the phrase new normality, Pilar, but, whatever we call it, the future sort of equilibrium that we will reach, at least for the next few years, which is going to be very, very different to what we had before.
Yeah. So looking at keeping that sense of connection in organizations at different levels and seeing what we can do around it. I am going to plug our new service that we haven't quite launched yet, but we're still thinking about for months, is this way of podcasting in-house. And actually, I'm saying this is a service, but anyone can do it, which is what are some of the ways that we can help our people feel connected regardless of where they are. And one of them is audio, deliberately made audio that is about regularly hearing from people within the company. And again, we're not just talking about the CEO talking about what's going to happen, etc. It's actually about finding those voices within the organization where it would be interesting to hear them, where they would provide a sense of connection, a sense of shared purpose still, and a way of sharing learning. What are people going through that they can share with their peers? So all in-house. And having a conversation about this with someone also, I realized, talking and going back to the concepts of visible teamwork, this kind of initiative would also be really nice to make visible those people that are usually invisible in companies and which might be even more invisible now. And they're usually the people who just get on with the work, but the work is not visible unless they mess up. You don't really feel them. And something like podcasting would be great because you have access to them because they can be wherever. And all they need is an internet connection and some kind of microphone and someone just to put some audio together. And now, I don't know, I think we need to start to look at different ways of keeping that sense of belonging beyond what we're used to.
Definitely. And, you're listening to a podcast right now. You obviously already recognize the power of audio to connect, to share, to provide that kind of intimacy and depth that you don't always get in a big group video call, for example, or an email thread or something like that. So I hope there will be a lot of organizations who are looking to explore everything that the multimedia world of communication has to offer and maybe going quite niche with something like in-house podcasting.
So also another article that starts to touch on some of this actually was published by Microsoft, and they did some research from different parts. Some of it was their data. Let's just look at it. So it's on the Microsoft.com blog, and I think maybe Chris shared this. The Future of Work, the Good, the Challenging, and the Unknown by the corporate vice president for Microsoft 365. And they've got, of course, they have lots of bits of data. They use trends behind how our customers use our tools. They use findings from a Harris Poll survey of over 2,000 remote workers in 6 countries and conclusions from over 30 research projects from across Microsoft. And they were really looking at the experience of remote workers. Mm-hmm. And they did use surveys, interviews, diary studies, focus groups, and studies of the human brain. It's great that they're putting the resources.
Yeah, I mean,
I really appreciate it.
You've got a Microsoft budget behind you. It's fantastic what you can do. It makes me smile because my formal higher education took place a little while ago, let's just say. So if we wanted to learn anything about human behavior and reaction and things, we had to do it all. Like the first bits of what you were saying was surveys and talking to people and stuff like this, whereas I love the fact that you can now just stick sensors on someone's head and see what's happening in their brain. And you can really cut through an awful lot of the whole project design and things you had to infer from indirect indicators to categorically state that brain waves reveal remote meeting fatigue is a real thing, for example. You can actually measure that in someone's cerebral cortex and publish it. So yeah, they concluded that their biosensors showed that brain activity, the brain exerts less effort when participating in a meeting using their new together mode, which, okay, fair enough. That's obviously they're promoting enhancements to teams and so on, but you can't say they haven't got the evidence.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's, I quite like that also, that they're not just, I mean, this is one thing that I have to give kudos Microsoft for, is that they really have evolved their ecosystem to what people were asking for. I don't know the data of it, but I can really see, and I know you can ask for requests. Everything is open. They use that quite well. Mm-hmm. If you have a suggestion or something, so you can see. And I really feel that they've gone behind what people wanted. Now, whether that's the way we should go or not sometimes is debatable, but they're doing that, and the fact that they've got all this data to inform the decisions. I wanted to pick up on that, the brainwaves thing around video meetings, because the bit that stood out for me was that the brainwave markers associated with overwork and stress are significantly higher in video meetings than non-meeting work, like writing emails. And I think now, if that is not a good advocate, a good piece of research to support the need for asynchronous communication.
Yes. I think we'll be coming back to this bookmark, won't we?
Yes. Yeah, well, definitely. It's going in the book, in the first chapter, in the introduction. However, as you said, they didn't. I think this could have been a great moment to say, and remember that Microsoft 365, previously Office 365, has lots of tools to help you with async. Because as you say, then they went on to talk about how the meeting, what they're doing around meetings has improved. And I thought, I would have loved you to mention things like Planner, like OneNote.
Yeah, just the rich messaging in Teams, or the different threading and by groups and things that you can do. I know some people who are really getting an incredible amount out of that. But no, they went for the shiny, sexy new thing of this together mode, where it puts everybody in the same background and it looks like you're in a sort of lecture theatre with all your colleagues, which looks quite cool. I haven't experienced it as a user myself yet, but I think, okay, fair play. At least they're evolving the product fast.
Yeah, and I like that it's playful, what they're doing, because that, as we know, sometimes traditionally the online space used to be quite formal. Of course, that's gone out of the window with looking at people's homes. But still, we don't want that little playfulness to go away from the remote work, because then it can become stuffy, and we want that energy.
And especially, it's not necessarily a value we associate with Microsoft. Obviously, they have changed a lot in recent years, but just the speed and responsiveness and the positioning now, it feels much more agile and startup-y than a brand that's been around building beige boxes for decades.
Yeah, so that's great. So I think that from this article, for me, the importance of using async, of course, I pulled out the one sentence that suggests that in the whole article. So yes, listeners, have a look though. It's really interesting to see what research they are getting on with. How about we finish, Maya, with quite a dry one on European legislation?
Yeah,
and thanks to Eva for sharing this. So this for me, I think it's really important that, well, working hours and everything has really gone out of the window during the pandemic. And of course, because we advocate for results based work, and we don't want to be looking at hours worked too much. However, there is still regulation. There is still how many hours can we work, and there's also still legislation that wants to protect us from getting worn out. So I just thought we could pull out this very sexy paper from Eurofund called Regulations to Address Work-Life Balance in Digital Flexible Working Arrangements. I like that the terminology.
Snappy title.
Yes, it's interesting. And this is from the 2nd of July, 2020. And the key findings are there, then you can download. I have to say, I haven't read the whole PDF, but I just thought it'd be good to bring it to the attention of listeners.
Yeah.
Anything stood out for you?
A number of things. I did skim through the PDF. I'm not going to say I read line by line. It is an EU research publication, so yes. Pretty dense. And an interesting sense that it's, I know it's a stereotype, but that EU bureaucrats love being able to measure and monitor things. And of course they can't, and they're really struggling to see how remote work has impacted on a lot of the legislation that they've been developing, in many cases for years and years. But, you know, these frameworks and directives are still there, and they are still there for the benefit of people working. And so, you know, people are trying to work out how to measure and implement them in the new situation. It was quite interesting that a lot of the best practice seems to have emerged from quite grassroots company level. It's like there's this gap in the middle of national legislation. At the top, we've got the EU putting in things like the Work-Life Balance Directive of last year, where, you know, they really want member states to implement flexible working arrangements and things like that, and to protect workers from discrimination if they want to work remotely or flexibly. And that's all at a really high level, and member states don't have to actually implement it for 3 years. But then when this crisis has hit, the EU's had to look at what individual companies are doing. And then somewhere in the middle, out of all that, is likely to come the actual national member state level law, which is probably going to look slightly different in each country. As we were saying earlier, they're reflecting really different national cultures around work. So, yeah, it's a moving target. A lot of the fieldwork for this was clearly done pre-COVID, but some of the analysis afterwards. So it sometimes felt a little bit like they've kind of bolted on a paragraph to say, and now, so something's changed. But it was an interesting read. There was one diagram that stood out for me, actually, where it was talking about which countries had legislation and protecting the rights of people to work in a remote or flexible way. And it was illustrated in a map of Europe. And it really struck me that it's the Southern European companies like Spain and Italy that are leading the way on this in actually enshrining it in law. Whereas UK and Scandinavia, it's really individual company policies and very little overarching legislation implemented yet.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to look at how the different countries adapt and adjust to the changing workplace. Yes, I just had thank you for that, Maya. Actually, that's really interesting.
Sorry,
I didn't pick up half of that
on a lot of this stuff.
It's great. No, it's really, really great. So what I picked up is the existing limits on working hours and rest periods included in the European Working Time Directive, and how much that how likely we are to be working around that, because we have limits on working hours already. So how does that, again, if we're not tracking our people, how do we know they're taking the time? And have we had the conversation to remind them also that it's not just, enough that it's about well-being, but also it's about the law. also that we have to respond to. And then there is just this little bit of a statement, recording the working time of TICTM, telework and ICT-based mobile work.
Trips off the tongue nicely, doesn't it?
It's a real challenge, the vocabulary around all this stuff, and you can see how different people are finding the terms that best suit what exactly they want to say. So anyway, sorry listeners, recording the working time of TICTM workers can be challenging. However, it is important because such workers are more vulnerable to working long hours. Only a few European countries have legislation that covers this issue specifically, which goes back to your point. And I think it is really important that we don't want to be tracking hours just to see that people are working. However, there might be a case for it in some context and in some way, and remembering why. It's nothing is so easy.
It's not, is
Why
it?
isn't it easy?
And the Working Time Directive is many years old now. I can't remember how many years.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it didn't really have a great deal of impact, so far as I could see, on knowledge work and executive work, where long hours culture is driven by the organisation and the sector, and nobody really seems that. But it's created a lot of protection and support for people in more hourly paid professions like lorry drivers with tachographs and things like that. And it's a really important piece of legislation, but I don't think it had a lot of impact in the traditional workplace in lots of sectors. So now actually measuring that is going to be one step removed with people working remotely. I understand why they're raising concerns about it, but I don't know how easy it's going to be to roll back. And I think that the future lies in things like the Work-Life Balance Directive and trying to help people get what they want out of work life in the future.
Yeah. 2003, that directive, so quite a long time ago. And of course, there's also there's waivers you can sign also. Yes. So it's, like you say, it really isn't easy. Listeners, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Any thoughts you've had or any thoughts you have, anything you would like to share with other listeners, because as we shall see now, we love to be that point of connection for those of you listening. So let's move on to what's going on at Virtual Not Distant and Connections. We're nothing without you, listeners. Send us your thoughts through the contact form at virtualnotdistant.com. So quite a lot going on, Maya, also, but we'll go through these quite quickly, because we are getting to again another hourly podcast episode. I wanted to pick up actually on some of the stuff that you said, your feedback, Maya. So if I can share with listeners that after the episode on trust and visible teamwork, you sent me an audio. I was so happy. You sent me an audio file with your thoughts, and that was so nice. And I wanted to share that with listeners, and also I just wanted to pick up on something that you said, which was around that we don't just it's not just important to trust that our employees are doing the work. It's not just important for employees that everyone's got our back, but also trusting the system that we've created, I imagine, Maya.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I feel quite strongly about, the whole kind of workflow design and everything else. You can take a lot of stress out of the work and accountability and everything else by having a system that works, whether that's capturing everything you've got to do or making sure that nothing's fallen through the cracks and so on. So I do think there's a lot to be got right there, and it's not just a case of trying the next new shiny app. It's thinking how your work fits into that system and adapting it and customizing it, and then everybody's trust can go up.
Yeah, it's really important to have things that are going to help us and that are even going to take trust a little bit away from the equation of making us work, of helping us work together well. I'm also thinking that a lot of companies I've seen are beyond that, they trust, and there's other things where they're struggling. The trust piece is completely covered, but there's still that sense of connection, that sense of support, the different struggles. So it's interesting. And then I was thinking also that we don't even need to deal with trust if we do a lot of other stuff. And I was going back to this virtual model that I used to use a long time ago, where V is visibility, I identity, R results, T is trust. And then we've got U for upgrowth, A for appreciation, and L for leadership. And I was thinking, if we do all of those things except trust, if we do things that address those things, practices, whatever, activities, trust just emerges. Because if we have visibility of the work, if we have a sense of identity, we see the results, if we learn together, appreciate each other, and if we have space for leadership from team members, trust will be there.
Yeah, it's the system, isn't it? You can build the trust structurally, and that can substitute or work alongside the trust in the individual, the kind of integral, motivational, character-based trust that we more commonly think of as that's what that word means.
Yeah. Excellent. So that I just thought it's nice to add a little bit. So we've got 3 solo episodes on visible teamwork, which you can find before this one. So check those out. Then I wanted to do a shout out to Lorraine Charles, who was a guest in our remote work for social change episode, I believe it was, a long time ago, talking about the work that she's been doing with refugees. Yeah. And she's just partnered, so CHAMS has partnered with her and the UNHCR to provide skills for remote work. And this is something published on the 30th of June. So I just wanted to congratulate her.
Yeah, fantastic news. And, you know, it echoes back to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about through this episode about when you really can work from anyone, from anywhere, then it opens up so many opportunities. And even people in refugee camps can potentially do meaningful and well-paid remote work. So it's fantastic.
Yeah. So NAMAL, a UK-registered social enterprise, recognizes the potential for refugees and other vulnerable populations to fill this space. So we'll stick the link in the show notes. Do have a good read. And I'm sure Lorraine is pretty up for answering any questions you might have. Or if you want to support her work in any way or find out more about it, I'm sure that she will be happy to. I'm sure she'll be happy to hear from you. I'm talking for her. Sorry, Lorraine. So also, if you don't mind, I think, Maya, do you want to tell listeners about what you're working on? Because I think it's really exciting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let me introduce you properly. Let me introduce you. So we've got healthyhappyhomeworking.com. And I actually picked up one of your articles, which is called, but this wasn't what I meant when I said working from home was great. Tell us about that article and this project.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this sort of publicly for the first time, really. This year, 2020, actually represents my 20th anniversary of working from home. And I'd always wanted to do something to mark it. And I was thinking about a TED talk, and I was thinking about a big book about everything I've learned about working from home in 20 years and things like that. And then, of course, everything changed in the world, and we just had to deal with the reality of the situation. But after a lot of thought and talking to different people, including a wonderful book coach who I happily to recommend to anybody who needs to get their head straight on these things, I decided it was actually more likely to be a book series, and that what people needed was quite short, actionable pieces of information to help them with whatever transitions they're battling with now, because people are at so many different stages when it comes to homework, whether they're having problems with their well-being or their boundaries or the practicalities and so on. So, that's where I'm at the moment. Healthy, Happy Homeworking is going to be a book series. The first book about transitioning to remote work, crossing the commuter chasm, should be available for pre-order within the next few weeks, which is very exciting. Very short, very practical. The next one is going to be about boundaries. The third book will be about productivity and getting stuff done. And I'm still researching the rest of the series, but I hope to have at least a couple more out before the end of the year. So, there is a new website. It's not a hell of a lot on it yet, but I thought I'd better write at least one blog post. So I decided to write the thing we've all been saying for the last few months about how this isn't what we meant when we said working from home was great. You know, what you're doing now isn't what we meant in the vast majority of cases. Surviving a global pandemic and making business continuity happen is not what we meant by healthy, happy home working.
Yeah. Good. Well, listeners, and there's an email sign up, no?
Yes, people can sign up, and there will be, a pre-sale price for people who are sort of early notified on that list. So yes, I'll gladly put the link in the show notes. And thank
Yay.
you.
Well done, well done. Well, I definitely look forward to reading more of the stuff, and really, and good luck with that. I think, and I think that bringing it out in small bits is great mainly for readers. You can really go, okay, this is what I need now.
Fantastic. Well, I hope it will solve problems, and I hope it will be quite complementary to the work we do at Virtual Not Distant, which is very much about the teams and helping the organisational side of the transition. I felt there was a gap in advocating for the individual caught up in all of this, and to try and give them some space to consider what they want, because decisions are being made. We saw that from the articles we discussed earlier. Decisions are being made at board level and corporation level about how we're going to do this and what it's going to look like in the future. And I think there'll be choices that people probably have to make quite fast about where do you want to work? Do you want to go back to work? Do you want to adapt your home? Do you want, what are you going to commit to? And I want people to have a chance to consider what's important to them and what they need as an individual, because as we all know, individual needs and priorities vary so much. And to be actually happy as well as healthy in the work that you do, you need to have that bit of self-awareness.
Yeah, definitely. Good. Excellent. Well, listeners, there you go. And talking of listeners, I wanted to give a shout out to Nick Hilvi-Mal, who, again, through LinkedIn, shared our podcast. And I love it because I don't know them, so it's always great to see that actually something that we do and we love. It's wonderful to hop on a show, talk to the microphone, and then suddenly someone else gets something from it. And so I wanted to share their takeaways from listening to the last few episodes, understanding the value of transparency and trust, especially with asynchronous communication. Sometimes we bang the drum and it goes out, yay. Hiring remotely and the challenges that come with that. Understanding what a transition process looks like for in-office employees moving to remote. So thank you very much. We love it that you share what you took from it. I think that was such specific feedback. I loved it. Thank you very much. And then I've got some very short things. I am running a workshop on the 3rd of September, 2020. We'll put the link to an events page because I don't have the link yet. Well, maybe by the time this goes out, we will have the link to that event. It is a Next Stage Radicals workshop. This is a community I belong to. And the workshop is going to be on planned spontaneity. And it's an exploration. They're calling them Exploring Aloud. So I've got no idea what we're going to do, but we're going, whoever is there, we are going to workshop the concept. And I'm really looking forward to sharing stuff that comes out from that. I wanted to, following a conversation on Twitter, I wanted to ask listeners, I'm putting out a call for sponsorship for transcripts for the show, because this is something we've talked a lot, especially with Maya, about should we have a transcript? And we decided to go for really good show notes, which Maya does. And I think, maybe there is a need for transcripts. So I'm putting it out there, listeners, if you know anyone or if your company wants to be involved. But we need sponsorship because that's added time more than added costs, because you need to clean up the stuff. We're going to put something that you can read. So that's a call out. And I want to say welcome to Becky Boyd from Boldly onto the Virtual Not Distant team to help us with some of the admin and some of the backend stuff. And she will for now be looking also after the LinkedIn page with us. So Becky, welcome. And of course, Boldly used to be 101 Worldwide, I think they were called. And their CEO, Sandra, was on the show some time ago. So that was lovely. I'm just rushing through these now. We've gone past the hour. Who cares?
If anyone's still listening, they'll last a few more minutes.
Yes, that's true. And finally, I found this yesterday. So I was doing a bit of research on Paolo Martinez, who's a facilitator with the IAF, because I'm going to be interviewing him for the Facilitation Stories podcast. And I found on the homepage of his company, which is called future.it in the English, he quoted our website, Relationships fuel a team, not physical proximity. And I thought, isn't that lovely that we are quoted on someone else's website? So
that's really nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's again, these sort of echoes back to us that people are picking up and resonating with what we're putting out there. It's so validating, because even though we talked about the podcasting for connection is something that's really great about connecting within a team. But when we do this, it's kind of one way. At a time. We're putting all our feelings and thoughts and everything out there. So we really appreciate it so much, especially if you've made it to the end of this mega episode, when you tell us what you think.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. virtualnotdistant.com if you want to send us a message. At Virtual Teamwork with a 0 instead of an O for tweets. At Maya Middlemiss, that's your full name now. At Maya Middlemiss, at Pilar Ortiz on Twitter. Thank you very much for listening, Maya. Any final words for our listeners?
No, can I put my aircon back on now?
Yes. Thank you for that, Maya, because I really appreciate it. All right, listeners, thank you very, very much for listening. A big thank you for listening to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast produced by Virtual Not Distant. If you have something to add to the conversation, let us know through the contact form over at virtualnotdistant.com. I have been your host, Pilar Ortiz, and I'm signing off now. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.